Today I'm showing you how to get the best results when applying white lava glaze. From consistency to application to firing tips. Please subscribe if you want more real studio insights and glaze tutorials. So white lava is a textural glaze that could also be considered a lichen glaze, and it creates a sort of eruptive, bubbly, three-dimensional almost surface on top of your piece. So it's certainly something that people use on sculptural forms, on maybe non-functional objects, in the sense that they're objects to maybe contain flowers, water, vases, light shades, etc. So they might have a function, but it's certainly not a glaze that's advised to be used on a food because it has a lot of texture. As with all the glazes, my advice is always to start with a little shake. Lava glazes are generally not really prone to loads of settling, but if you've had it sitting around the studio for quite a while, it might start losing some water content, drying up and solidifying. So definitely a shake first. If it's set for a long time, shaking in general as the first step is always preferred over any carving or mixing, etc. Because it loosens the materials. And some glazes will be more prone to settling and dead panning than others, and in a way we're constantly trying to battle that while still retaining visual qualities and the effects of the glazes that we like. White lava. So once we've done a good mix, then we're going to check its consistency. It's looking pretty good. I don't think I need anything extra in this case. I will just mix it further with a brush, and I'm going to go for my favorite wide brush. This is sort of a medium width because it fits in nicely into the jar for mixing, but also provides me with loads of glaze once it's loaded to have an even surface. I quite like lava glazes on colored clays. Especially the white one, because it's quite minimal. So on the black clay, this is Sibelco smooth black stoneware. That's a really lovely black clay to work with, especially once it's been sort of burnished, or maybe you used a kidney or wooden tool, but equally with texture and a bit of sand that it contains. It can be quite a versatile clay body, and it works really nice with this white lava, so that's what I've chosen for our test today. So I'll give a thorough mix to the bottom of the container just to make sure that there's no sediment, no big chunks, nothing kind of happening in there, and we can really see the consistency of this sort of nice double cream maybe. So in this case, I will work with a few layers because white lava glaze is certainly a glaze to experiment with and kind of test its boundaries depending on the type of work you're creating. So I'm going to start putting on my first coat and go in one direction. As it's a sculptural glaze that is going to get fired, it's going to expand and sort of move and transform quite drastically from a very smooth, usual glaze-like looking surface into something that's much, much more three-dimensional and expanding and sort of transforming drastically. We can be a bit less concerned about the perfectionism in terms of application of the layers, right? Because most probably we're not going to see those brush strokes, we're not going to see any difference. Of course, we're going to see the variation in thickness, but that might be the artistic approach you decide to take anyways. Maybe that's what you want to experiment with and highlight certain areas of your piece with much more eruptive, thick sort of chunks of three-dimensional lava versus others where it sort of fades out and thins out and becomes of a just kind of grayish, slightly textured layer. So I would say this is pretty good going for one coat. I'm also going to do the rim and a bit on the inside. If you are making a vase or an object that might have a function in mind, you might want to use a different glaze on the inside of your piece, a kind of liner glaze that is maybe neutral, right? Something that's like transparent or white, seals the surface on the inside the pot to make sure you can put water in it, etc. So as the piece was quite dry sitting on the shelf, and also I didn't wipe it before this, it was quite clean, etc. It didn't really need much waiting between the coats. This will really depend on the thickness of your piece, the clay body you're using, right? That will have quite an impact. And also how thick are you planning to build up. So between first and second coat, I'd say usually you don't need that much weighting. Most probably your bisque, unless it's a very thin porcelain, will be able to take 2 coats pretty quickly, one after another. But it's once you're moving on to coat number 3, possibly coat number 4, if you're going that thick, where you might want to set the piece aside and let it have some time. How do we judge when we are ready to go with our next coat? Is most probably by the look, right? How wet is it looking? Is it becoming lighter and more powdery quite quickly, or is it taking time? We can also touch, is it being tacky to the fingers? This is pretty dry, right? Already straight away, there's no tackiness. However, when I touch it, I feel and I see that it's not drying as quickly. There's a bit more of a lagging time between my application and the dryness, but also it feels a bit more cool. So it means it's containing moisture within the walls of the bisque. As the piece sits and dries, it might be a good moment to also talk about not only coating, but also layering lava. And I have a few examples that we have created in the studio before, and especially this one, which I'll start with, has very clear kind of sides or facets that showcase the thickness of application and what effect it has on the outcome. So here we've got coat number 1. We've got here side number 2 with 2 coats, 3 and 4. And you can really see as we go along how the effect transforms and shifts. So when you have 1 coat, firstly, it's much harder to achieve uniformity when you're applying just 1 coat. But you can play with this more subtle effect of where it's almost like dry lichen-like surface that then slowly starts to bubble up when there's enough of material and thickness. Then you might want to transition into 2 coats, which I'd say is a good optimum amount for a lava glaze. So it's enough to have uniformity. It's also already enough of material to have the bubbling and growth, right? It's still quite a safe bet, because once you start going with 3 and 4, you can see it creates much thicker and bigger growth that might also be something of a concern. And that's what we're going to talk about now with this test. So firstly, important to note, it's a test that's been done by layering glazes. So first we applied 2 coats of tea dust, one of our other signature glazes, a heavy iron glaze that's quite trickly dark. If fired and applied properly, might create little tea dust effects and kind of streaky blue-green sort of speckles within the surface, but otherwise is almost like oil spot, like black deep dark glaze. So that was the first glaze applied, and second is our white lava we're talking about today, and it was applied at 3 coats. And you can see how the movement of the glaze underneath, that's much more of a fluxed glaze that moves a lot, made it sort of flow and collect in certain areas and create big pools of white lava. So what happens to white lava in generally, even without other glaze underneath, it doesn't really move with gravity downwards that much like other flowy fluxed glazes do. It sort of expands sideways, it grows and erupts, and those eruptions can lead to it expanding so much, especially if it's placed near to other objects, is that it can touch them, or rather even attach, like in this case, which can be a cool effect. However, it also could be a concern, especially if you're working in a community studio, or you might be placing it next to pieces that are more fragile and gentle. So you want to create an environment where you're sure that that's not going to happen. So maybe separating your lava pieces on the separate kiln shelves, different firing altogether if you have that luxury, or maybe taking such precautions in community situations such as using danger discs, saggers, as well as staying away from applying 3 or 4 coats, but playing it safe and using 2 coats, which still should give you plenty of lava, but stay away from the danger zone of it growing. Another thing to note with these kind of growths, and generally the thicker the glaze, the lava glaze is, and here are some more examples. Right. And in this case, we can see that even though I'm banging it with a nail relatively vigorously, is it's not really chipping. It's quite sturdy, and especially if I touch it with the pad of my finger, it's not really going anywhere, which is what most of us really want with the lava glaze. I'd say that means not applying it too thickly. Again, 2 coats, maximum 3 would be my recommendation. And also another thing to think about here, to take into consideration, is firing temperature. Whilst we provide a wide-ish stoneware range for this glaze, ultimately the higher you fire the lava, the more sturdy the surface will be. So the lower ranges of stoneware firings might lead to softer and more chippy lava surfaces. Thank you very much for watching.